Welcome back. Now we're going to cover creating splines. How to create splines. Okay, so let's go ahead and open up the file, download it. It'll go into your downloads folder, open the file. Alright, so it's hard to see what's going on here. So let me turn on my filter. Again, the filter is optional. If yours is turned off, or maybe you accidentally turned it off, you can always right click on any icon. Go to user selection filter. I'm going to select, hey, I only want to pick curves and lines, right? I'm going to window select, left mouse click, and window select. And I'm going to turn those into a green color that we can see. So most likely, whoever created these tutorials probably had a white background. I'm assuming it was white because they had to take snapshots to put onto the tutorials on the website. And you can always change your background. I prefer the soft colors, just easier on the eye. All right, so let's go ahead and turn these to green. There it is. All right, so we're going to go through the tutorial for splines. Okay, so we're going to use the spline command. And we're going to connect 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 points. Okay, so we're supposed to have some points there. So let's go back to CATIA. I don't see any points, but there they are. They're actually there. Don't forget to turn off your filter. I forgot to turn it off. Okay, so there they are. Yeah, with the curve filter on, I can't select anything other than curves. So it doesn't let me pick, but turn it off. Okay, so we do have 7 points there. They're just hard to see. So I'm going to select them from here. Or I can window capture, right? Let's go ahead and turn on the points filter. So it only captures points, and there it is. You can see it's selecting the points. I'm going to right click properties, make them yellow where I can see them. Okay, deselect, click on space, and turn off your filter. Okay, so now we can see the 7 points. All right, a lot easier on the eye. All right, so let's use the spline command, and it should be below the circle, right? Unless you were using corner or connect curve or conic. It's in that same toolbar, right, as point, line, plane, project, intersect, parallel, curve, circle, and spline is the last one. There's more options. We'll just stick to spline. If we have time, I'll come back and talk about some of these other options, which are used quite a bit in advanced surfacing. Okay, so we have the spline command. I can pick the points from space, or just to make sure I go in order, I can go point 1, 2, 3, 4. You can see it forming. 5. Let's say I accidentally skip 6. Let's say I skip it, I misclicked, I skipped it and go straight to 7. Like, oh, I messed up. Either I have to start over, or I can say, hey, I messed up. Let me go add point before. Let me extend this. Add point before. So before point number 7, we have point number 6. So it's going to insert point number 6 between point 5 and 7. Okay, so let's go and pick it. So here's point 6, and 3, 2, 1, don't blink. There it is. It reinserts it. Or I should say it inserts it, right? You can also replace points. So if later on you have a separate point out here and you want to replace point 6 with point X, you can always click replace. Click on point 6 and click on the new point, and it'll replace it. Okay, we also have the option to close the spline. See how it shapes it, right? So it's trying to fit through all the points while trying to keep its shape. So when you think of shape, think of, once again, high wires, or electric wires, I should say. The wires are trying to keep their shape, right? It's hard to get a tight radius on wires because they're trying to hold its natural shape. Okay, so same thing with those high voltage cables. Okay, so let's go back. All right, so once again, we can close the spline that we just created. We can also add tension, and we can also add curvature to the spline at any point we choose. Okay, so let's go back. So we're going to use existing geometry to help us shape the spline. Okay, so I'm going to deviate slightly from the tutorial. Okay, so let's say I wanted to shape the spline. Let me first exit and close so I can change the color. Forgot to create a geoset. That's okay. I'll just change it from here. All right, so let's say I wanted to shape the spline at this point to follow this line. Okay, so I'm going to double click. Okay, so I go to point number 2 on the list. Okay, so point number 2, there it is. And let's say I wanted to shape it. So at this point, it's going in the same direction as this line. So I'm going to pick the line in 3, 2, 1, don't blink. See how it's trying to shape it so it follows this line at that point, same direction. Okay, and just like our previous videos, we have the tension option. So if I go to show more parameters, you can increase tension if you like. As you can see, increase, decrease. Just like pulling on a string when you're flying a kite, or if you're in a gym on a tug of war, 1 against 1 or a team against a team, and you're pulling on this heavy rope, right? You're trying to add tension to shape it, or maybe relax it by removing tension. All right, so you can see once again it's shaping it. Now let's go to the 4th point. Let's say we wanted to shape it so it's tangent to this one. So let's go to point number 4 on the list. You can see it's orange, it's highlighted, and this time I'm going to pick this spline. See how it shapes it to follow the shape of this geometry. Same thing with the previous one. It's trying to shape it. Okay, and we also have the option to shape in the tangent or curvature continuity option. If you don't see curvature on your CATIA at work or at home, or maybe it's grayed out, chances are you have the basic license and not the XD2 or 2DX advanced license for generative shape design. So watch what happens when I click on curvature in 3, 2, 1. See how it gives it more shape? It's trying to clean up the curvature. Okay, so we have curvature. We can always go back to the first one, point number 2, and do the same thing. Go back to number 2 and add curvature in 3, 2, 1. See how it's trying to shape in it? So it's difficult to tell where it changes direction or where it's intersecting the point. All right, so once again, you can mess with the tension, reduce the tension, increase the tension. All right, let's try something a little different. When running cables, so when you're dealing with high voltage cables, so electric car, for example, electric cars have these cables that are thick, right? Similar to the type of cables you see. I misspelled it. There it is. So similar to the battery cables to your car. So when you see an electric vehicle, if you look under the hood or near the charging unit, if you can somehow get in there and look, they have these high voltage cables. Typically, it should be covered in orange. I believe that's standard that we follow here in the US. I'm assuming also the other countries use the same color. So this color is telling us that this is a high voltage cable. In this case, it leads to the charge port where you connect your charging component, right? And these are thick. These are around 13 or 14 millimeters in diameter, which is more than half an inch in diameter. Okay. So these high voltage cables, I mean, you're running it down. So there's one vehicle that I worked on. I had to create the drawings for these cables that were running all the way to the charge port in the back of the car towards the tail light. and running all through the trunk, through the side, through the interior, along the side of the seats, through the firewall, and towards the front of the vehicle. And these were 15 feet long because it had to twist and turn and go under. Now, you don't want to take these cables and try and make a V shape out of it, right? You don't want to take these and try and bend them because you'll destroy or break the wiring. So when you model this in 3D, in CATIA or another software, you can limit how much you can bend it by applying a radius. Like, hey, we don't want to bend it less than, let's say, 10 millimeter radius. I'm just making up numbers. If you try and create a tight turn with the small radius, it'll break. And this has happened with some startup electric car vehicles where they try to take the cables and make a sharp turn, maybe somewhere near your gas pedal where it's running along the side of the driver by the door opening, by the door frame, and it has to make a sharp turn into the dash or into the firewall. And there's been issues where these have broken and maybe even caused fires because of the sharp turn. So you have to take that into account when routing cables. By the way, CATIA does have a routing cable workbench. You have to pay for it. It's extra. I just prefer to use splines and generative shape design to generate my cables, wire harnesses, and then create my drawings. Okay, so let's go back. So that leads to, how do we add a radius? So when we model it, there's a radius that a minimum radius that we're going to use when shaping the cables and running it through the vehicle. Once again, from near the charge or at the charge port, near the tail light, going through the trunk, going through the seats and making turns along the side, going by the door frames, etc., to the firewall, and through the firewall to the front, to the battery. Okay, so you have to take that into account when you're modeling these electric cables, especially these high voltage cables. All right, so if we wanted to add a radius, let's go back. So let's say I had a tight turn in this area and I was worried that the radius was going to be too tight. Its natural shape was just too tight and I wanted to control it. So let's go to point number 6 and add a radius. So go to point 6. All right, the first thing we need to add is a tangent, then a tension, then a curvature direction, and then we can type in our radius. Okay. If you were using the cable harness workbench, you'll be able to set up your parameters up front, so it keeps a more natural shape that the cable wants to maintain based on its material, the thickness, the diameter, etc. All right, so I'm going to go to explicit, and for my tangent direction, I'm going to go in the y direction. So if you see the compass here, I'm going to go in the y direction. So I had to make a tight turn, but I'm trying to maintain that radius, that minimum radius. So in the tangent, I click inside, then I right click and I pick the y direction. So this is the y direction. You can see the compass here going in the y direction. Okay, I'm going to add tension to it. Increase the tension. Typically the minimum you want to use is 0.8. And you can go maybe up to 1.6, maybe 2. All right, so now for curvature, let's go to curvature. I'm going to right click and this time let's go in the X direction. Okay, so X. Okay, so now it's trying to turn in the X direction. And now I can add a radius. See how tight that radius is? We don't want a thick cable to make this tight turn, right? 0.1 millimeter radius, that's way too tight. So I'm going to increase it and watch what happens. Okay, so it's trying to adjust itself to a minimum radius, curvature radius, right? So if the minimum radius was 10, I'll just use 10 or something higher, right? And that's so you don't damage the high voltage cables. You don't want to damage those metal cables inside. Okay. All right, so let's hit OK. And you're able to control the shape as it turns, and it doesn't cause damage to the electric wires. I'm gonna have to fix this area, right? So I would have to create a different curvature radius for this area. So it's only applying to this area here. All right. Just wanted you to be aware of that. Let's go back to the tutorial, see if we missed anything. Oh, reverse. I forgot about reverse. So you can flip it and reverse it, right? So we can flip a tangent or a curvature. Okay, so let's go back. Okay, so let's go back to spline. I'm going to double click on the spline. Let's go back to our first one, our first tangent here at point number 2. Okay, so point number 2. So it's hard to see, but there's a red arrow. If we go back to the tutorial, they're hard to see, but there's these little red arrows that allows you to flip the direction of the spline or the curve. Okay, so I'm gonna click don't blink on the red arrow, and I know it's hard to see. So we are at point number 2. 3, 2, 1, flip it and reverse it. There it is. We reversed it, right? Change direction, there's an inflection point and it turns around, right? Okay, if you don't see the red arrow, we can always flip it from here. We can reverse, as you can see, from here. Okay, we're not going to do that. Let's go to point number 4, just so you can see we can apply it in other locations. So here's point number 4. We have a tangent or curvature continuity. We can flip it with the red arrow, as you can see. That's not what we want, right? Okay, so you have that option to flip using the red arrow or flip it from clicking the button here. Okay, you can always remove curvature, remove items. If there's something that you change your mind on, you want to remove it, you should be able to right click or be able to remove it from using these buttons. Okay, you can remove curvature and so on. You can show parameters. If you want to increase tangency, for example, right? Let me go back to point number 1. Point number 1. Let's say I wanted to add a tangent. I don't like the way this is ending. It's curving in. Let's say I wanted to go more in the X direction. Okay, so I'm going to add a tangency in the X and watch what happens to the spline at point number 1. So here we are, point number 1. And we're going to add a tangency. You know what? Let's go ahead and use this same line. It's going in the X direction, right? See how it turns it? So now it's going in the X direction. All right. Could do the same with the other point, point number 7. Okay, let's go in the X direction. Now it's hard to see, but it's actually flipping it's going in the wrong direction. If we zoom in, be aware of this. If I zoom in, see how it's not going in the right direction? It's twisting and turning. I'm like, nah, let's flip it. There it is. There's the red arrow if you want to flip it again. Okay, so it looks a lot better. Maybe this turn is a little too much, but you do encounter situations like this when you're installing cables, wire harness. All right, okay, so let's go back, make sure I didn't miss anything on this tutorial. Okay, so these are the red arrows we're just talking about. You can flip, reverse, right? It'll change the shape when you flip it. All right, so this is the end of this tutorial. Let's go ahead and save our work. Okay, you don't have to do all the extras that I did. If you just want to do a simple spline and just connect the 7 points, I'm okay with that. And you'll get the full credit. You don't have to do the entire tutorial. All right, so I'm going to file save as. If you want to type in initials or complete it. Okay, and save your work. Oh, I'm in the wrong folder. Wireframing geometry and splines. Save. Okay. And once again, it'll be uploaded into YouTube, obviously. End of video. See you in the next one.